Okay, welcome to Faith and Calm. This is episode 161, and I think we're going to continue one more week talking about the significance and the meaning of a Rebbe. And as my wife put it, you know how to zap all your issues in life. Zap something. What are you supposed to zap?
Zap negativity in
Zap
life.
negativity in life.
Yes.
Good. Now, I know what I'm talking about. Do I know what I'm talking about? That was a question.
He's joking. Go ahead.
We'll find out. We'll find out if I know what I'm talking about.
Okay.
Because I've been listening to stuff, and so hopefully it's in my head at this point in time. So I mean, many people think that what is a Rebbe? Because it's between Gimel Tammuz and Yud Beis Tammuz, so I'm talking a lot about a Rebbe. And the Rebbe is somebody who's, a big rabbi, knows more. He's a leader of people. He makes programs and so forth. It's really not the core of what a Rebbe is and why it's important to have a Rebbe in your life. A Rebbe is more than just another teacher. Many Jews have a tremendous knowledge of Torah. You can learn a lot from them. You can learn from their activities, their midos, how they behave. You can learn about their fear of God from them and so forth. But a Rebbe is a soul doctor. That's why Hasidim go to see a Rebbe, spend a lot of time traveling to see a Rebbe. And what does a soul doctor basically mean? So a lot of us know things about ourselves. We know what we're good at. We know what we're not so good at doing. We know a little bit about our intellectual capabilities. We know what some of our emotional traits, what we get afraid of, and where we're strong emotionally, and so forth. But the soul is a spiritual thing, and the soul is about, what is my years of Hashem? What is my fear of Hashem? What is my love of Hashem? What are the things that do I have courage in? What do I have faith and trust in Hashem? A Rebbe lights that soul. You go to a Rebbe, you talk to a Rebbe, you follow what a Rebbe does, and he inspires the inner soul part of the person. And when the soul is on fire, then, here, 1 second. Pin myself. When a soul is on fire, then everything else gets much easier because my mental capabilities, my emotional capabilities, and everything else become in tune with my higher being. And when I'm aligned with that, then everything else becomes much easier and much more smooth because I know what I'm doing and I know where I'm going. I'm going to give you a lot of stories today. And these are going to hopefully all tie together. The first story I liked very much when I heard it. And this is a story of a contemporary story. It happened sometime in the 1970s, 80s, I think in the early 80s. There was this Jew who, politely to put it, was a nudnik.
He
came from California. A nudnik. A nudnik. What is a nudnik? Well, you'll see what a nudnik is. This guy thought that all rabbis and religious leaders from any religion, he had equal faith, equal for everyone. He believed they were all a bunch of fakers, and therefore he felt his job was to expose how they really weren't real, they weren't. So he used to go whenever they would call a rabbi or a priest or whatever, would he do everybody come to a town, he would go and he would sit in the front row and he would stare at the person until that person blinked and gave in. So sometime in the early 80s, he came to Crown Heights, and he went to 770, and he sat in the front row, and he started staring at the Rebbe. And the Rebbe is speaking to a couple thousand people, and at one point in time, the Rebbe fixes his eyes on this guy. And when the Rebbe fixed his eyes on you, you couldn't stare back because it was looking in the sun. You were stuck. So he had to look away. So then he starts looking again at the Rebbe. And the Rebbe looks at him again, and he has to look away. And after a while, he gave up on this. And he remained a nudnik. But he had an appreciation that there are some rabbis you just can't stare down. I mean, there are some people who are real. And many years later, there was the reason we know the story was there's a Chabad Shliach. He went to Malibu where this guy lived. and he was giving a talk, and he was a very good speaker, and he spoke all sorts of very interesting ideas and concepts and so forth. And the guy was there, and he was listening to it. And at one point in time, he said to him, Rabbi, you got to stop talking. He says, what you're saying is very nice and it's very interesting, and I could stay here all night. But we want to hear the Rebbe. We don't want to hear about you. We don't hear your interpretation of things. And this was the nudnik, meaning that, something happened to him. Something happened to him. Something changed him. Something inspired him. Something moved him. Something on a spiritual level. And he realized that, it's not just all external about actions and deeds and so forth. There are some people who actually are at a different level. Now, the Rebbe, as a true Rebbe he is not about himself. He is a mirror. When you look to the Rebbe, people were able to speak about their most personal things. Why? Because when you looked at the Rebbe, basically you looked at yourself. He had no attention. He drew no attention to himself. The whole focus, I never had this experience to have a one-on-one with the Rebbe, but they said, well, I went by dollars they had with the Rebbe, but it's close to that. Anyways, but different. But they were those who did it, explained, and they said, Jonathan Sachs, he went in and he says, I didn't feel there was anybody in the room. The Rebbe I was just me. The Rebbe was helping me see who I am and what my capabilities are. Or as he also put it, is the Rebbe did not make did not want followers, but he made leaders. In other words, when you came in touch with the Rebbe, you began to appreciate who your potential was, because that was the focus of that's the focus of the Rebbe, to be able to bring out the best inside each of us. So then, to continue that in the story form, is there was this. This is about 100 years ago. There was a rabbi named Yosef Rosen. He lived in Eastern Europe, and he later became one of the teachers of the Lubavitcher Rebbe, Menachem Mendel Schneerson. But when he was a young man, he was known as an Eloi, as a genius. He became later known as the Rogatchover Gaon. And he invented a whole new way of learning halacha, philosophically, and so forth. But that's not what I'm talking about here. When he was a young man, he mastered all of the Gemara, all of Shas, and he was, as many young men in those days, a little bit arrogant about it. And so he decided at 18 years old, he would go from town to town and do what they used to have a war of Torah. He would find a local rabbi in the town, and he would start a discussion with him. And then he would start arguing. And he would say, maybe you should understand this, or this way, or this way, or this way. And he would test the rabbi, to see how much he knew. And many times, he had no fear. The guy was 80 years old, or 85 years old, and a big scholar and so forth. But this Rogatchover Gaon would just, had no fear of anybody. And a lot of the times he just said, these guys don't know what they're talking about. Every once in a while, he would find somebody who he was impressed with. And this is the example of the story. He once went to Lublin in Russia, and was in Poland at those times, still is. And he was a big city of rabbis, of scholars. And he came across a Chabad rabbi who was the Rav of the town, the halachic decider. His name was Shneur Zalman Fradkin, who was a big Chabad chassid, who was the chassid of the Mittler Rebbe and knew Shas backwards and forwards. And this Rogatchover Gaon, young kid at that time, comes in and he starts arguing with him. And how does he start arguing? He just starts mentioning page numbers in the Gemara. And they're going back and forth, pages back and forth, this page and that page and this page and that page, just the numbers of the pages, which shows, what kind of geniuses they are, because they obviously knew what they were talking about. They knew what was on the content of every single page in the Gemara. And he goes on like this for a couple hours, and he's enjoying it tremendously. I mean, it's a wrestling match par excellence, and back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Finally, he leaves. And he's like dizzy, and he says, wow. He says, that old man, he knows this, he knows how to learn. That Alta Yid. That's what the Rogatchover said. And because he met his match, and he was happy to either win or lose, but he found somebody he could argue with. Anyway, while he was leaving, he said, is there anybody else in this town who I can argue with? And the guy says, yeah, actually there is. He's not a Chabadnik, he's not a chassid. He is a different chassid. He's named the the Rabbi Tzadok Cohen of Lublin, the Tzidkas Tzedek, as he's known. He was the Hasidic mentor, the Hasidic leader of the town of Lublin. So the Rogatchover Gaon goes to him. If you're still following the story, goes to him, and he starts to try and get under his skin and start an argument with him. And he starts quoting pages, this and that. And the Tzadok Cohen is just sitting there with his arms folded, listening, and he's not taking the bait. And the Rogatchover tries this argument and this and that and so forth, and he just sits there. And after a while, the Rogatchover gets a little tired of the debate because it's not going anywhere. And the Tzadok Cohen of Lublin looks at him and says, Younger man, he says, I was once like you. I used to wipe the floor with everybody I came across. But I learned that it's not a life. That's not the way to live. And so I advise you, what you should do is you should go find yourself a Rebbe, and you should hook yourself to him, and he will make you into who you can possibly become. And the Rogatchover did that. And that is an important part of what a Rebbe is. A Rebbe helps actualize who we are. How does he do that? Well, we have to do that. You see, if you're able to go to him and you're able to talk to him, that's one way. The other way is you follow what his directives are. The Rebbe wanted each one of us to stop focusing on ourselves, and he said, and focus on another Jew. And when you do the Rebbe's will, and you focus on other Jews that you come across, that itself is the best way to deal with your own problems and your own issues. As the Rebbe said in his very first mimer, when he first became a Rebbe, he said, this generation is very much connected to the first generation. The first generation, generation one, was the generation of Avram Avinu, and the seventh generation is the generation that we're in, and we are going to finish the job of what Avraham did. Avraham was very involved in every single person that he ran across, Jew or non-Jew. And it says that what Avraham did is he didn't make him Altikra v'yikra ela b'yakra. He used to make everybody recognize God. And how did he do it? He made them call out to God. Not that he called out to God, but rather he made them realize that there's a God in the world. So every single person in this generation is, in a way, connects to the Rebbe and brings out their soul powers by working with other people. And each of us have different communities who we're able to talk to, and different Jews that we come across. And every one of us and everybody in this generation is very much in need of more of a bond and more of a connection with God. And when a Jew himself helps another person light up his candle, as I said in last week's class, that helps you also light your own candle. And it also helps you illuminate the darkness that you are in. So this is definitely one of the big messages of the Rebbe. I'll tell another story here, and that is, so this is the story with Reuven Dunham. So Reuven Dunham was an interesting person. Reuven Dunham lived in Haifa. I think he was born sometime before, a little bit before the War of Independence in Israel. And after he grew up in a religious household, but he left a lot of the that religious experience, and he became a backhoe, a tractor driver. You know, like those backhoes that they plow and they dig and do construction. And he was involved in all sorts of constructions and trucks and other kinds of stuff. And in Haifa, which is known as the Red City, it was a very communist, left-wing, still is, secular city. But at one point in time, he started to come closer to a Chabad rabbi, and he connected back to his roots, and he wanted to come back all completely to Yiddishkeit. So his spiritual teacher, Rabbi Kesselman, told him you should go to Crown Heights and talk to the Rebbe, and he'll give you a path to how to do tshuva. So he came to New York, he came to Crown Heights, he got an appointment with the Lubavitcher Rebbe, and he was told that when you first go into the Lubavitcher Rebbe, the very first thing he says to you is going to be a lesson in how you are, your life's mission in this world. So he came into the Rebbe, and he wrote a letter, And he said how he wants to do tshuva and how he wants to fix what, all his different things that he was all the he was very open with all the things that he got into while he was not religious. And he listened to the Rebbe, and the Rebbe led his letter. And the first thing that came out of the Rebbe's mouth was, "You know how to operate a backhoe?" And he was like, he broke down and he started crying. He said, that's like the thing I wanted to get away from. That's like asking me, do I have a cross around my neck? I mean, it's the symbol of everything that I did wrong in my life. And the Rebbe's question was, Rebbe said to him, he says, listen, this is the first thing you have to do, is you have to learn how to love and enjoy your life. That's the first step. The second is that he told him that you can come into this office anytime you want. The Rebbe basically took him in as a child, and he had a free access. Just knock on the door. You could come into the Rebbe's office anytime you wanted to. And he really connected to the Rebbe. He really connected to the Rebbe in a very deep way. And the Rebbe loved him. And he went back to Israel, and he went back to Haifa, and he became this tremendous spiritual guide for people in Haifa. Maybe thousands of Israelis came back to Yiddishkeit through him because he broke all the stereotypes. I mean, here's a guy who basically was a blue-collar construction worker with the construction hat and with the beard. He didn't look like the usual chassid. He didn't talk like the usual chassid. He could talk to people on their level. And he had tremendous impact. So the Rebbe saw, you didn't go off the path in order to just run away from it. This itself was God leading you in a certain way so that you would have the skills and the capability to be able to infect a large group of Jewish people. And this was Reuven Dunan. And he was a tremendous chassid. He learned constantly. He was very knowledgeable, but he was also extremely much a man of the world and connected. And that's what a Rebbe helps us do. A Rebbe helps us to figure out who we're doing and what we're supposed to be doing in this world, because as I heard Rabbi Friedman say many times, he says, there is no way to be happy in this world unless you are doing the things that you're supposed to be doing. And there's no way to feel more sad and upset when you're involved in things that really are not about the activities that your soul came down into this world. So it's sort of vital and essential for each and one of us to be able to figure out, what am I here for? What am I doing here? Who's going to give me that direction? Who's going to give me that inspiration? Who's going to help me figure out, here, this is what I'm supposed to be doing? And when you're doing what you're supposed to be doing, it's really very powerful. Do I have another story? From Dunan Fradkin. Oh yeah, I do have one more story here. So another story that I have that sort of illustrates the idea of a Rebbe as being a transparent looking glass to what's higher than you and helping you connect to God, is the Rebbe probably would never, view himself as, the fact that people have all these pictures of him and they view him as a leader and stuff like that. The Rebbe's focus was entirely on you, on making us each who we are supposed to be. So there was once a man who was involved in chinuch and Jewish education who came to the Rebbe in 1975, and he had a personal one-on-one conversation with the Rebbe. And then he didn't see him for many years. And 15 years later, when there were no longer individual one-on-one conversations, he came for Sunday dollars to the Rebbe. And as he was walking by, the Rebbe stopped him after giving him $1 and began the conversation, continuing the discussion that they had 15 years earlier, 1975. And the man looked at the Rebbe and said, "Rebbe, you're amazing." He said, I didn't even remember until you said, what we were talking about 15 years ago. How do you remember? Out of all the thousands of people who are coming here, and you remember what we were talking about? And the Rebbe's immediate response, without missing a heartbeat, was, how does it help the world if I'm amazing? The main thing is that that you do what you're supposed to do in order to advance Jewish education. The Rebbe's, this is an important aspect of connecting and understanding, and connecting another Jew to the Rebbe, and connecting ourselves to the Rebbe, and connecting ourselves to God. Is understanding that we have We are the amazing ones, and we are the interesting ones, and we have more power and more potential and more capabilities than we give ourselves credit for. And the Rebbe, this also explains another thing. The Rebbe rarely gave any compliments to anybody, and the reason basically is because he always saw you have tremendous potential, you have tremendous capabilities, and nothing can ever stop you because you're a piece of godliness. And therefore, stop thinking of yourself as small and stop thinking of yourself as a person with a lot of problems and issues. And start thinking of and start doing some practical stuff about what you can do to help another Jew. And actually, this will actually turn your life around. When you start seeing how many people you're able to affect, like Reuven Dunham, how many people you're able to actually lift up, and how many people you're actually able to inspire, and how many people that your particular personality is you made as a unique individual to be able to do something in this world. That itself is like the greatest healing in the world. So it's the actual accomplishments that we actually get to do, and that makes us connected to the Rebbe, connected to his mission, and connected to his. Of course, it's also very good to learn what the Rebbe teaches, learn the Chassidus, and Mr. Shem, my wife will continue the stories and explain more of what a Rebbe is about. And with that, I will turn over the microphone to you. And
thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Okay. So nice to see you. So nice to see you, Susan. I haven't seen you for many years. And does anybody have any questions before I begin? I'm going to be very short tonight. No, I don't think so. So I want to say that also I would love to take your questions and answers, but I want to say that the only thing I would add to what Yeskel Shimon, first let me say the four things I start with. Number one, we're in an amazing time. This is not a normal time. We know that in 1991, the Rebbe told us that we are in the unfolding of the redemption, and that the redemption of the Jewish people in the entire world has begun. And the Rebbe was never wrong about a public pronouncement that he made. And he made the most logic-defying predictions, and they all came true. So this one is also coming true. And the other thing is that our souls were handpicked to be in this time. We have the Torah, which is our guidebook. We have the Rebbe's instructions, which is really a huge part of our guidebook, and we have the mitzvahs, which are our power tool. And even tonight, what we're doing tonight actively furthers the redemption of the world. The Rebbe said there's no faster way to further the redemption of the world than by learning about it. So I would like to just add something to what Yeskel Shimon said. And, I heard something beautiful last week from Rabbi Paltiel. And I listened to a variety of different rabbis. And Rabbi Paltiel is a wonderful one. He talks a lot about the history of Chabad and the history of the Rebbe, and it's just fascinating. The stories are just amazing about the history of Chabad. And he made an interesting comment. He said that when people, as awesome as the Rebbe is, as awesome as the Rebbe is, people did not feel. People all felt one thing: nobody felt judged. When the Rebbe looked at somebody, another Jew, he did not judge them at all. He simply saw their potential and directed them to their potential. And I think it's a marvelous, we all struggle in some way. There's some people who are more judgmental and some people who are less judgmental, but we all struggle with it. And I think it's a marvelous thing to keep in mind that when you look at another Jew, and if judgments start coming to your mind, you push them away and you say to yourself, how can I help this person? How can I help this person? This person has magnificence that I can't even begin to fathom. He's a Jew. A Jew has magnificence. So, so we have to constantly redirect ourselves. We have to be like the Rebbe, and no judgments. Just how can I help this yid? What can I do? Well, how can I help this yid? Maybe they just need to be listened to. How can I help them? So, the other thing I would like to say is that it's important to remember that the Rebbe is not past tense, and that the Rebbe is not past tense. We'll go into that a little bit more. But there's a person, even a person who never saw the Rebbe, can have a full, huge relationship with the Rebbe. And there's two ways to do it. Number one, by writing to the Rebbe. You know, people go, there are thousands of people who go, there are two ways to do it. You can either put a letter into one of the volumes of the letters of the Rebbe, the letters that the Rebbe wrote to other people. They published the Rebbe's answers, not the questions, but the answers the Rebbe gave to thousands of people. And they took the names, who the letter was addressed to, they took it off. So it's all, you know, confidential, who the letter went to. And these are incredible letters. And people, you know, they often ask, they seek advice through the pages of Igros Kodesh. And I've gotten the most, I mean, I've gotten and I continue to get the most astounding letters, the most astounding letters. You know, I have a problem. I open to something. Of yeah, it's just astounding. So okay, now the next thing that I wanted to say is that we have to know who we are. It's another important thing in life. Who are we? We are soldiers, you know? We are soldiers. We're soldiers in the Rebbe's army. We're soldiers in Hashem's army. When Hashem made the world, he made it on the condition that he had a partnership. Hashem said, I'm going to make a world. I'm going to make a beautiful world. He consulted with the Jewish neshamas before the world was created. He consulted with the Jewish neshamas and he said, I have an idea. I want to make a world, but I want you to make it into a good world. And it's not going to be easy. And there's going to be lots of challenges. Are you up to it? Do you want to do it? And the Jews agreed. They agreed to this deal. So Hashem makes a beautiful world, and we make it into a good world. And it's not like Hashem, you know, he left or anything like that. He's helping us every step of the way, but we are soldiers in making this world what it was always intended to be. We're bringing the real essence of the world out. And so anyway, I want to go back to something. I want to talk about this thing not being past tense. So you know, remember we talked about a little bit last week that we just came out of Gimel Tammuz. Gimel Tammuz in 1994. Gimel Tammuz was that was the date when the Rebbe's heart stopped in the hospital. And it was on a Saturday night, and the next day was the funeral. And people thought, that's an ending, and ending to the dream, an ending to everything. And it was not an ending. And I remember back then I was just I'd already been learning the Rebbe stuff for a couple of years. I was a closet Lubavitcher. I was working as the vice principal of a Jewish women's seminary in Manhattan at that time. And nobody knew that I was becoming closer to Lubavitch except maybe the principal of the school, because we would commute into Manhattan together and I would be learning the Rebbe stuff and I couldn't hold it in. And I would say, you've got to hear this one. And so she's the only one person who probably suspected that I was becoming a Lubavitcher. So at a certain point, I decided I was dating a lot of people. I went through a lot of different people. And at a certain point, I decided, you know, Shlomo Yehudis, your heart is going in this direction. You can't turn away. You can't turn back from Lubavitch. It's just so beautiful. It's where your heart is leaning. You should look for a Lubavitcher. So it took me a long time. I contacted a Lubavitcher Shadchan, and after dating 120 guys. I went through approximately 120 guys. The first Lubavitcher's name out of his mouth was Yeheskel Shimon Gutfreund. So we were supposed to go out on our first date on Gimel Tammuz 1994. And Yeheskel Shimon called me in the morning, that Sunday morning, to tell me what had happened and to say that he's going to the funeral and he thinks we should postpone our first date. So we both went independently to the funeral, and we started dating. And after 3 weeks, I remember one night I couldn't sleep, and I was thinking, I like to psychoanalyze myself. So I was thinking, oh, what's your problem, Shlomo Yehudis? Why aren't you sleeping? Is it the guy? Do you have problems with this? Do you have problems with that? What's happening? And all of a sudden I just said loudly to myself, no, it's not the guy. I cannot give up on Mashiach. It's too drilled into me. I cannot. And then I found out there's no reason to give up, that the Rebbe himself explained everything that we have to know about Gimel Tammuz. The Rebbe, can you imagine? Years earlier, the Rebbe gave at least 2 talks, one in 1985 and one in 1991, about what Gimel Tammuz means. That's the date. That's what other people call his yahrzeit. Yeah, and he said 3 years before, and then about 9 years before, he said he gave talks completely about what Gimel Tammuz is all about. Nobody ever made a big deal about that date. The Rebbe said you have to understand that Gimel Tammuz. He said he gave different examples. I'm not going to go into the details. He said Gimel Tammuz looks like a confusing day because people don't know what to make of it. But I'm telling you now that Gimel Tammuz is the beginning of the redemption. And he said, but it's the type of beginning that will only be apparent in hindsight. And he brought out a couple of examples. He brought an example, we mentioned it last week, of his father-in-law's imprisonment. His father-in-law was, brutally imprisoned by the communists in 1927, brutally treated, beaten, thrown down a flight of iron stairs, had guns pointed to his head repeatedly because they wanted him to give them the names of all the people who the Frierdiker Rebbe, the previous Rebbe, had set up a network of secret schools throughout Russia, hundreds and hundreds of secret schools, single-handedly to keep Judaism alive. This was probably the largest concentration of Jews in the world, and the Frierdiker Rebbe said, we've got to keep it alive. And if there's no Jewish children learning Torah, there soon will be no Judaism. There'll be no Jews, because we have to have Jewish children learning Torah. And he did it with tremendous self-sacrifice. Many people, many of his helpers died in the process. They were killed by the communists and tortured, killed, everything. And so they jailed him. And then on Gimel Tammuz in 1927, some people said it was because of world pressure, they decided to commute his sentence to exile. And they sent him to a place called Kostroma. And as the Rebbe explains, this Gimel Tammuz, nobody knew, is it good? Is it bad? Is it, he's still under their thumb. They could kill him at any moment. So nobody celebrated. And the Rebbe said, when he was ultimately released on the 12th and 13th of Tammuz, people understood in hindsight, dang, Gimel Tammuz was the beginning of the redemption, was the beginning of the good times, was the beginning of his release. And so Rebbe said the Rebbe said when a Jewish date has a certain nature, it has that nature every year. So we have to know that Gimel Tammuz is the beginning of the redemption, but it's not going to be apparent only from hindsight. I'm just going to give you one more example, which I also mentioned last week, and then I'm going to finish. That he also brought the example, something that happened, I think it was something that happened like 3,200 years earlier. I have to look up the date. I have to look up the numbers. It's an even number. That's the date that Joshua, Moshe's successor as leader of the Jews, when Moshe's neshama went up to heaven on the 7th of Adar, 2488, then his student Yehoshua, Joshua took over, and it was his job to cross the Jordan River and to take the Jews into Israel. And he had to lead all the battles for the Jews to get Israel. And in one battle, I think I mentioned it last week. In one battle, he looked up at the sun and he said, "Sun, stop, be quiet." And by that he meant, "Sun, stop moving, stay where you are. Don't, he didn't want the sun to set because he wanted to have more time to chase and pursue the Gibeonites, their enemies, and to win the battle. But if the sun went down, they wouldn't be able to continue the battle. They'd lose their edge. And so, why did he say, by the way, why did he say be quiet? Because everything in creation sings to Hashem. Everything in creation sings to Hashem. And the stars and the moon, the planets, their form of song is their movement. Their movement is their song. And not only that, like, for example, the sun goes from east to west and it sets in the west. And it sets in the west, and it says the Shekhinah is in the west. So when the sun and the moon are going through the sky, they go down in the west. They're prostrating themselves to Hashem every day. Every day they have this cycle of prostrating themselves to Hashem. So anyway, the Rebbe brings out these points that in Yehoshua's example, Hashem, Yehoshua's example is a model for our time. Yehoshua could have asked Hashem to do the whole thing, but he didn't. He said, "Hashem, you do this." He said, "Son, you do this." And Hashem agreed. The sun would stay still so that the Jewish people could continue the battle. And it's the exact parallel for our times. Hashem does not win the battle for us. Hashem made a deal with us in the very beginning that we're the soldiers. We're the ones that are going to turn this world over for goodness. And he wants us to do it. He's there helping. Even in the battle with Yehoshua, it says that Hashem was sending meteors down to help in the battle. But he didn't do the whole thing because we are the soldiers. The Rebbe said the same thing is true for us right now. Hashem is not doing the whole thing for us. He's simply setting a stage. He's setting a stage for us to be successful, to win the battle. So it's important to know that we're all soldiers. We all have a mission. That mission is very much what Yehezkel Shimon said, to light up another Jew. The Rebbe said a Jew is a lamplighter. And our job is to light up other Jews. And an easy way to learn through this is by reading almost anything the Rebbe wrote. It's so inspiring. My first book was called From Exile to Redemption. It's little paragraphs about the redemption, and they're so inspiring. That's what I was sharing with my teacher in the car. It was so inspiring. So a way to be a soldier is simply to get online or at a bookstore, get any book by the Lubavitcher Rebbe and start reading it. It'll be so inspiring that you'll become a lamplighter of others. And the other thing is to connect to the Rebbe for advice and blessing. So and I want to end there. And if anybody has any questions, I would love to hear them.